I've covered the general history of the Harrier family in other videos, but still, the US Marine Corps had identified the requirement for an updated trainer for their Harrier II fleet, which resulted in the TAV-8B, which was developed by McDonnell Douglas with BAE as a major subcontractor. When the UK wanted a new trainer version of the Harrier II for their own domestic use, the TAV-8B was used as the basis for the new project. The British version, called the T.10, added a full weapon system and was intended to be fully compatible with the GR7. Only about a dozen were produced, with one assigned to each Harrier II squadron and the leftovers being held for testing and additional lead-in pilot training. What we get in War Thunder is the Harrier T.10, a premium naval strike aircraft and rank 7 of the UK air tree at battle rating 11.3 for air and 11.7 for ground. This jet gets a fully featured ballistics computer for its air-to-ground weapons, and an ARI 23-333 radar warning receiver, which includes a missile approach warning sensor. It also gets an integrated FLIR system, but no radar. For loadouts, there are generous presets with a variety of air-to-ground weapons and sidewinders, along with an optional targeting pod and extra countermeasure pods. The air-to-air missile you get is the AIM-9L. This is an all-aspect 30G missile with fairly good performance, but a competent opponent can still flare it off without much hassle. Still, it's a good weapon and it'll get you some kills. There are also a few different options for laser-guided bombs in different weights and quantities, with the GBU-24 being my personal preference. I usually opt for a smaller number of heavier hitters, but if you prefer quantity, the smaller ones are still there. Lastly, you can pick from 3 versions of the Maverick, with either laser or infrared guidance and different warheads. I usually go with the 65G, with the infrared guidance and SAP-HE warhead, but just remember that sometimes Mavericks won't one-shot targets up at the top tier. The flight performance of this jet is broadly compatible to other versions of the Harrier II, but it's a bit heavier, which actually ends up making a difference. There's a noticeable decline in dogfighting agility compared to the GR7, especially with a weapons load. The engine power is still pretty strong. I mean, it has to be for VTOL stuff, and the low-end acceleration is quite good. The jet is still subsonic, and like other Harriers, you need to watch your engine temps. You're probably going to find yourself cruising around at about 80 to 90% throttle whenever you're not in combat. The other thing to mention is that due to the extra weight, it's a full ton heavier than the GR7. It doesn't swing around quite as fast while it's in a hover. Viffing maneuvers and low-speed pivots with the nozzles down didn't quite feel as responsive as other versions of the Harrier II, but it's still possible. Taking this jet into air battles was, honestly, a bit frustrating. You're going to be the slowest plane on the team about 90% of the time, which means that you'll be late to the party in terms of hitting the strategic bases. Remember, this is a ground attack jet. In air combat, the energy retention isn't very good, and with a low top speed, and without any radar or long-range weapons, you're already at a disadvantage. Plus, as of making this video, none of the ammo belts for its cannons have any tracers. This means that since you don't get an EEGS or anything, you're firing completely blind trying to do deflection shots and stuff in air combat. The good news is, the heavier bomb loadouts can take out a base in one pass if you manage to get there, and it's got an enormous supply of countermeasures, plus the missile approach warning system, so at least you're not defenseless. Out over a ground battle, the story is much the same. The low top speed makes you an easier target for SAMs and SPAA than some of the faster strike jets at top tier, and without a radar, you're entirely dependent on visual spotting in air combat. Keep in mind that you'll pretty often be facing major cloud cover which you can't see through, but fighters with radar can still see you. Now, the good news here is that its air-to-ground weapons are all pretty strong, and going out with the LGBs or Mavericks can usually get you at least a kill or two every sortie, as long as your team has air superiority. This was the first jet I've flown at the top tier where I felt like enemy fighters were a bigger threat than the Pansirs and flak buses. Visually, to state the obvious, it's kind of funny looking with the redesigned front end, and I know a lot of you are going to think it's ugly. I kinda like it, and before you judge this plane too harshly, I submit to you this picture of the Yak 38's two-seat trainer, as a reminder that, in terms of two-seater VTOL jets, it could look a lot goofier. Landing is basically the same as other Harriers. You can do all the usual VTOL stuff, and generally speaking, the landing performance is very beginner-friendly after you practice just a couple of times. In conventional landings, you can put the gear out at 640 kilometers an hour and the flaps at 550. Inside the cockpit, you're sitting in the front seat, so you've got an obstructed view to the rear, but otherwise the visibility is good. The MFDs are large and in good positions, and the heads-up display is useful. Pretty average cockpit for a subsonic ground pounder. To close out on the Harrier T.10. This jet gets a good selection of guided air-to-ground weapons. It has tons of countermeasures. It can do VTOL stuff, and it gets premium bonuses. However, no radar. It's not the best in a dogfight. It's subsonic. It's got a really steep learning curve if you're coming into this without a lot of experience in high-tier jets, and none of the ammo belts for its cannons have any tracer rounds. The final verdict on the Harrier T.10 is that, if I'm being honest, I didn't really have a very good time with this plane. If you need a British close air support jet at this BR, this might be what you're looking for. However, it's got a very narrow niche that it falls into, and outside of that, it might have a hard time being competitive. As always, thanks for watching, and if you liked this video, check out this other one.